Welcome back, everybody. This is CMN 153 for our Tuesday class on July 28th. And where we are is at the point of the semester where you are handing in journals. Because now that we've established a little bit what media and popular culture is and how individuals study media and popular culture, we began our semester, or at least in my thinking, we began the semester when we talked about advertising and public relations. So I talked a little bit about advertising and public relations. The text had a chapter devoted both to advertising and public relations. And I included 2 videos as well for you to watch about advertising and public relations, as well as some discussion forum questions about advertising and public relations. And what I encourage you to do is to read the responses from your classmates from the discussion forum, because that might help you in terms of pulling together your journal. I think of the discussion forum being very similar to what we might do in class with having a discussion. So you would be able to hear your peers' attitudes and thoughts and questions about advertising and public relations, because today, the 28th, is when your first journal is due. And you can send that to me via email at ruiz, R-U-I-Z, at gcc.mass.edu, please as a PDF or as a Word document. And then I will be reviewing that and getting that back to you. I will be evaluating on a checkmark scale. I'm not grading for grammar or mechanics. I just think of it as a kind of conversation on paper, approximately a page or so, but as long or as short as you'd like it to be, where you get to share some of your thoughts based on everything we've discussed thus far with advertising and public relations. And as you can know, we've just barely touched the surface in terms of advertising and public relations. And that'll be the case with all of these media that we discuss over the course of the semester. But the idea behind the semester was that it was supposed to give you an overview of different kinds of media. And certainly in the future, you could study another form of media in depth. Or if you are interested in media, I teach another communications class in the fall, and it is a class that specializes not in a particular form of media, but a particular topic associated with media. And the topic for the fall semester happens to be horror film, which happens to be a personal interest of mine. So if you are interested in horror film, and of course we've got our October Halloween coming, you might be interested in that particular class. And it is an online class, much like this class is, that doesn't have any required Zoom meetings, so hopefully that can accommodate lots of different schedules. And if you needed more or wanted more information about that class, I'll be happy to share it with you. This class, CMN 153, is recommended for that class, but not required. So if you happen to know a horror fan buff in your life that might be interested in the course, you might want to share that information with them. In terms of thinking about our final projects, that is something that you can find in terms of a particular interest of yours. I've already shared a particular interest of mine. If I were doing a final project, I might be very tempted to devote my final project to horror film in media and popular culture. But the options are perhaps almost endless. You can discuss something that's of interest to you, something that we've discussed in class or perhaps haven't discussed in class in terms of media and popular culture. And over the next few classes, I'll be talking more about that particular final project to hopefully give you some ideas and suggestions on how you can proceed. And you can hand in that final project at any point in the semester, but the last date that you could hand it in would be the very last day of the semester. But I encourage you to begin thinking about that now. And your journals might help inform how you proceed with your final project. So I've definitely had students who have used their journal writing in the past as a kind of springboard for developing a final project. And you'll see that as the semester progresses, you basically have a journal every Tuesday and Thursday. Certainly if you needed an extension, ask me for it, and I'll be happy to grant it for you. And those journals are basically asking you to discuss the media that we've discussed in the class previously. So where we are now is moving beyond advertising, which I've called the glue that holds all media together, and public relations. And we're moving to the internet, And one of the reasons why I put the internet first in our review in class, even though it perhaps is one of the more recent forms of media and popular culture, since I usually like to think about media from a chronological perspective whenever possible, is because of media convergence and how basically all different kinds of technological media have merged into the internet. So now the internet is basically providing books, magazines, television, movies, video games, and well, the list goes on basically down our particular syllabus. And I thought what I would do in terms of the internet, which has become such an integral part of our society. In fact, if it wasn't for the internet, we wouldn't be able to have class right now, considering our current reality. So I'm very grateful for it. But as we all know, the internet is a double-edged sword. But nevertheless, I thought that I would talk a little bit about what Chapter 2 discusses in terms of the internet. And also mention to you that some of the feedback that I've gotten about the discussion forums that we've been doing is that a 24-hour period, it may not necessarily be sufficient in this new reality that we're all living in and some of the obligations and challenges that we have. So what I'm going to do is to change that over to 48 hours. So now you've got 48 hours to answer the forum discussion questions for attendance. And if it turns out you need additional time, please let me know and I'll be happy to give you that. Just send me an email. Again, I want to try to be as flexible as possible. And luckily, because of the internet, we are able to have this experience together. But Chapter 2 talks a little bit about the history of the internet. And I'm old enough to remember actually much of the creation of the internet. Though the internet actually began in the 1960s. It was a U.S. military government project, ARPANET, and that stands for Advanced Research Projects Agency. And it was an attempt to find a way to have a decentralized military communications in the event of some sort of national crisis. Academia became involved as well, and it became one of the primary ways for academia to have communication. This is how basically email was created, electronic mail, in 1971, and that with the creation of microprocessors, miniature circuits that process and store electronic signals, we've got the birth of what we know today. Basically, if we had to define the internet, it's a linked, decentralized network of phones, cables, and satellites that immediately carry digital information, uncensored, worldwide, for either two-way or one-to-many communications. And the uncensored part is one of the great challenges of the internet, and we will talk about many of the challenges of the internet over this particular chapter. But that said, the internet in the 1990s, and these are the pieces that I remember best in terms of the internet, because that would have put me in graduate school and the beginning of my academic career. It was labeled as the information superhighway, and it was seen that basically it was going to be a way in which individuals could share information. Of course, it's become so much more over the last couple of decades. And in terms of expansion, the internet first needed to have the World Wide Web, which was a text data linking system. That was developed in the late 1980s by a software engineer by the name of Tim Berners-Lee at CERN. That happens to be the European Organization for Nuclear Research, and that's in Switzerland. So he is basically credited with the internet that we know of today. And in fact, today's attendance question is going to be about Tim Berners-Lee and his recent talk about his thoughts about how his creation has evolved over time. But without him, we would not have a World Wide Web, which means we would not have the internet that we think of today. That text data linking system needed to have some sort of a web browser or web browsers, software to help navigate the web. And that also meant that we needed to have an internet service provider in order to navigate that web. And for the 1990s, that meant America Online, AOL, which was the most popular internet service provider. But that was before broadband. And once broadband came about, which allowed the quick download of multimedia content, all kinds of media got involved in terms of offering internet. So now a phone is just one option, cable is another option. And what that meant is the internet began to grow almost exponentially in terms of the content that was being uploaded and downloaded, that we needed to have search engines. These are automated mathematical algorithms that help us locate web content. Probably Google is the best known of that. And what all of this expansion meant was that business interests became involved, and the idea of centralization. What's most important, and this is something that we'll be talking about over the course of the semester, is the Telecommunications Act of 1996 in terms of business. What was so important about the Telecommunications Act of 1996? It deregulated restrictions in telecommunications. So what did this mean? This meant that an individual or a corporation could have almost unlimited holdings in different media. If you've ever heard the name Rupert Murdoch, which is a name that we will be revisiting later in our journalism section, he is the founder of Fox News. He took great advantage of this deregulation and buying lots of different medias. The difficulty involved was that you needed to be an American, and Rupert Murdoch was an Australian. However, he got dual citizenship to the United States, and that meant that he became one of the most powerful owners in media, which means that even though we've got lots of different media, more than we've ever seen before, much of the content is generated from the same perspective, which is very problematic in terms of the internet. Again, one of the many difficulties associated with the internet that Tim Berners-Lee talks about. So this centralization has led to major players, and we know some of these names. We know about, for instance, Facebook and Mark Zuckerberg. We know Google. We know things like, I'm trying to think, social media platforms such as Instagram, and they've all become major players in terms of the way that we receive content and the way that we upload content. And if you know anything about business, then you know about a monopoly, which is illegal. The idea that you've got one individual who's controlling an entire industry. Oligopoly means that you've got a limited number of individuals who are controlling an industry, and that's basically what the internet has become, and telecommunications has become, oligopolies, with perhaps the possibility of monopolies, which is very problematic in terms of the dissemination of information. Again, digital communication is what basically the internet does. It allows us to have image, text, and sound electronically converted. The way it does so is through binary numbers, ones and zeros. And that's led to, in addition to all of the options that we have with the internet, is the growth of social networks. And that too is a double-edged sword. Social media being digital platforms encouraging users to create content, to comment, and to interact, albeit on a social basis rather than an academic basis. And some of the ways that that's been done are through blogs, where digital content is posted in chronological order. Wikis, where you have collaborative website content. Probably the most famous is Wikipedia. And as you know, the idea is actually transformative, that knowledge can be better developed through groups of individuals than through individuals alone. But that said, there isn't necessarily a way to ensure that all of those groups of individuals are giving valid information. So again, another double-edged sword. And virtual worlds, the integration of 3D digital environments. So you've got all of that, and once you've added media convergence, you get some issues, some challenges, including the digital divide, the disparity between those groups that do have digital access and don't have digital access. And perhaps that's best seen right now in terms of the individuals who are able to have education in an online format, as opposed to those individuals who are unable to because they don't have the hardware, they don't have the software, or they don't have the internet access. Net neutrality the idea that every website and user has the same internet access and speed. A very controversial topic, especially now that business interests have become involved and have argued that perhaps they, because they're larger, or perhaps in one way or another they serve the public good, should have better access and higher speeds than an individual. And of course, all of this has exploded with the use of mobile devices, handheld computers. So now we can access all of this information on the go. Another major issue confronting the internet, of many major issues, are the privacy issues. And phishing, which you might be familiar with, it's email, internet identity theft. It's something that workplaces in particular, including GCC, have to contend with. There's also spyware, where you've got software that is secretly gathering information about us, so that whenever we're on the internet, it's quite possible that information is being gathered about us. Data mining are those data collecting systems that gather all of this together. And cookies, and you've probably received some messages about cookies. They're automated collection and transfer of information profiles. And sometimes you're not allowed to use a website unless you accept cookies. And basically what you're doing when you're accepting cookies is that you're allowing information to be gathered about you and collected about you, and again, used in one way or another, and we're not necessarily sure by whom or how. Another issue with the internet is artificial intelligence, and there was a recent article that came out a few days ago about this with Elon Musk, where he's backed an artificial intelligence text generator that, at least right now, seems to be able to begin to generate its own code. And what that might mean for the future in a positive or negative way, no one knows. But I've attached a link to that article in our notes so that you can see that. And the last piece about the internet, or the last piece at least that I'm going to be addressing about the internet, is the piece that we are experiencing right now, video communications. And Zoom has become the most popular video audio chat conferencing platform. And I think I might have mentioned in a previous class that from a business standpoint, what Bill Gates did was absolutely brilliant. By offering unlimited Zoom in the early days of the pandemic, so that basically that was the platform that most individuals worked towards. And eventually he withdrew that so that you've got a limited amount of time for Zoom for free, which is how Zoom had originally been created. But so many people were already using this platform and felt that it was necessary for their business and their educational needs that they've signed up for subscriptions. So I'm not in any way suggesting that that Bill Gates did this merely for a business perspective and not for any altruistic motives. My suspicion might be that he was doing both at the same time, but it was definitely a very successful business strategy. So for today's attendance, what I'm going to ask you to do is to watch a video, and it's approximately an hour long or so, and it talks about the future of the web. It was done in 2018 by Tim Berners-Lee himself, the creator, as we talked about. And you can see that he talks about some of the challenges that he sees confronting with the web and some of the ways that he's trying to address those challenges. He teaches at MIT now. He's just taken a sabbatical, actually, to form a startup company, as you will see from this, though he's originally from Sweden. And our attendance question, as I like to ask attendance questions that don't necessarily ask for right or wrong answers, the attendance question happens to be, what do you think is the biggest challenge facing the internet today, and why? So that's something that you could easily discuss in a journal if you so wanted to, but there are lots of ways to proceed with your internet journal, whether it be you're talking about with the text and I've discussed in relation to the internet, whether or not you want to talk about what Tim Berners-Lee, actually it's Sir Tim Berners-Lee now, is discussing in his video about the internet, whether or not it's what you want to discuss in terms of what your classmates might have posted on the discussion forum about what they think about the internet, or whether it's just your own personal experiences with the internet and your own personal observations. Your journal doesn't necessarily have to be devoted to the biggest challenge facing the internet. That was just a very specific question that I wanted you to ask for the discussion forum, but certainly you could utilize that. But feel free in your journal to talk about the internet in whatever way seems to be interesting and relevant to you. Again, approximately a page or so, but as long or as short as it needs to be. And next class, we'll talk about books, and we will also talk a little bit more about the final project. So I hope you're well, I'm well, and I'll speak with you soon. Take care. Bye-bye.